Wait, no, you and me. Is there an embarrassing moment
No, I
between?
would not share that. I don't have it.
All right. Well, you got something you want to? Anything you want to add? Embarrassing.
No, I don't.
All right. They're afraid of me. No, I'm just okay. Lament versus complain. How do you differentiate the two? Lament versus complain. Okay. So lament versus complain. How do you differentiate the two? All right. What's the difference? Yeah. How did you know? How did you know you were not complaining when you came to the U.S. from the mission field? Okay, and not, how do you know if you're lamenting or complaining? Okay.
Do you want me to?
Start, yep,
Oh, okay. I think that's actually a great question. What is the difference between almost like sinful complaint versus maybe, God honoring lament? I think truthfully, on the surface of it, they may not look any different. I think as we saw in those lament psalms yesterday even, David is just like letting God have it, not pulling any punches. And what I see in Scripture is more about sort of the heart underneath that a lot of times. I think a similar thing has to do with unbelief. It seems almost kind of schizophrenic of God, but sometimes he seems to really rebuke unbelief, and sometimes he seems to accommodate it or honor it. And it seems like there is sometimes this unbelief of genuine searching and struggling to reach out to God. And then there's this kind of unbelief that could also be represented as more of this rebellious, I'm not even really looking for the answers from you, God, unbelief, of like, I've come to my own conclusions about you, and this is what I think of you, and on and on. And so I think something similar is also going on when we talk about complaint versus lament, is that one of the ideas of biblical lament is that the hunger is for wholeness, the hunger is for restoration, the hunger is for answers. And so there can be this kind of trying to almost take a shot at God and just like I have already made up my mind and this is how I feel. And it's this kind of attitude toward God, like rebellion with a high hand, versus like, I am hurting here, God. I am really struggling for answers in my heart, and I'm reaching out to you, but even in my reaching out to you, I'm even struggling with that. There's a difference between coming to God with that kind of humility and brokenness versus pride and arrogance and almost like attacking God in that way. But truthfully, in the early stages of lament and complaint, I think actually they can look very similar, But it's what's the ultimate heart? Is it trying to move toward God or really attacking him in a way that's very defiant and against God? I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that, but.
I was just thinking that complaint makes you feel good for a moment, where lament sort of doesn't make you feel good for a little bit longer. I think complaint a lot of times is outward focused. You're blaming, you're accusing, you're attacking, where lament a lot of times is inward focused. You're actually feeling bad, not only about the situation, but now it becomes internally oriented. Complaint, as Pastor Steve said, is actually, as you begin to work through it, you'll find it drops down to a rebellion. It drops down another, almost like you're going down a spiral stair, a bitterness and anger, and now all of a sudden it's a rebellion. You're against God. In the end, you don't believe in his goodness. You don't believe in anything that he's doing. And in the ultimate last step, as you're actually stepping off, the stairs spiral down, not to a floor, they step off into oblivion. You now are against God forever if you don't pull back up out of complaining and switch it, as Pastor Steve said, to now a lament that these things are real. And that's one thing it's hard for us to get to, is sometimes we don't want to name the actual reality of the situation, what happened to us, how we're feeling, and then not make it complaining, but it is a lament that it did hurt us. And then we got to sort out, was it, something that was sinful and wrong, or just neutrally tried happen, or something we actually caused issues with.
One thought of complaining and lament, sometimes like it does look similar with all these distinctions that you say or what, what to do. If you're reading it, I don't know, reading it wrong. So do not look at these questions, okay? So depression, don't know what to say, what to do. How can we speak to someone who's really struggling with depression?
Anyone want to start?
You could show them that old picture and see if you can get a laugh out of them. I'm sorry.
I think starting with listening and trying to how to listen, not with the purpose to try to fix them, as to listen, truly listen to what are the root causes, what is causing the depression, what are some of the feelings that they are trying to process through.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to touch on the depression?
I'd affirm that and say I think the picture of like Job's friends before they started talking, once they started talking, it wasn't so good. But just like, yeah, sitting with someone. I think this, when it comes to like depression, like I think if you have never struggled with depression, it can be very hard to understand. And you can think like, well, just when have I woken up and felt sad today? And then just go, well, I guess that's depression. And I don't think we really understand what someone is going through when they really are in a pretty dark season of depression, and feeling like on our end, like we could just snap them out of it, like just say the right words, and then it'll like wake them up like they're from a dream. And that's a very naive view of depression. And so sometimes in these extended seasons when somebody's really in a dark place, I do feel like it is about coming alongside them and just showing them support and love. And in those moments, if there is a God-given moment to speak words of truth. But I think that, yeah, I think it's exactly right, where it can't start in that posture trying to fix them, and think what they need more than anything is that unconditional love and support and presence with them through a lot of that, for sure, yeah. And, within this whole realm of depression, even speaking from the medical side, I know there are varying views on this, even within the church, as to whether there's a place for medications and stuff like that. I just to let you know my, 2 cents on it is, I do believe that there is a place for medication in depression and things like that. I worry sometimes if that just becomes the sort of the panacea, that we think it just get them on some SSRIs and then we'll fix them and stuff. And I think something that's wrong, but I do think that there's definitely a proper place for medication and things like that, along with godly counsel, the support of a community, and all those kind of things as well, for sure.
One thought I have is when someone is really depressed, it's really helpful if you can approach them in like a more of a community. It's not just you. So if it's like husband and wife, like a child, I feel like sometimes they need to be rotating a little bit to be alongside of them, because if one person is alongside for a while, at a certain point, you just feel like saying snap out of it, and then, even among friends, it could be like a rotational, component. If you're doing one-on-one on a really depressed person, the Bible talks about sin. It says, do not, when you try and help, someone who's in sin, don't be careful that you don't slip. I have seen people that's, they feel like they're trying to help, and they just, actually that depression gets to them, and it's almost like that drags them down. So I think bringing them into a community, and that community kind of coming alongside. I really think in a real deep, dark depression, they really have to, I know it sounds so generic again, but have to find Jesus. Not many could go there, with them, like, as much. The other thought I have is sometimes, I'm talking more in parenthood. Like, I think sometimes there could be wisdom every once in a while. One of the parents is, at a certain phase, a little more like, hey, can you, think about others sometimes. I think I don't know, you guys can disagree with me here. I think that's appropriate. Even in friendship, there could, kind of like, I don't know, this is just my thinking, and Steve or anyone could disagree, is that, if there's some who's a little more like, stricter cop and another one more counseling, and there's actually a flow of that, I feel like that could help, depression. And I've seen situations where your girlfriend is like that, and you're the boyfriend trying to help, and it's just like you're going through some dark spots, you know. Even like you're a parent and there's a child that's like that. I really feel like it should be sometimes even bigger than that family. You know, it should be brought into a bigger community to try to help that person.
Yeah, I think there's just several different areas in this. Like what Pastor Steve has been talking about, our emotions, if they get stuck inside, a lot of crazy things can happen. And so one is just letting things out, having someone you can talk to. Jesus is always there. One thing I was just sharing with the married men's group that they put me in was, because I'm married, is I just have to start talking to Jesus about stuff. And my wife now has allowed me to talk to her about. Now, my wife, she's a fighter, and she will get angry, and she will let things out. So she doesn't get depressed as much. Or I'll use the word sad. But for me, I'll keep it inside, so I'll tend to go that way more. I've read book that has said that, one of the main elements of depression is a deep, deep self-pity. That you're always, woe is me, and you can't break out of that. Being able to express those elements is very important. The other thing that's very interesting that they use for depression, I've heard, is a bit of a shock therapy, electric pulsating through your body, believe it or not. And what they're trying to do is revive these areas. So some things that actually help anyone in this room is you will start to get into habits and roots. You'll do the same thing over and over again, and pretty soon your state becomes just a steady state, and it could dip down in negative, or it could stay positive. So one thing that helps is to change the habit, change the same day to day. So that's why some people do crazy stuff like skydiving or bungee jumping and things like this. This also works for habits such as OCD and things like that. If you're allowed to stay in it, but shocking people, getting them out, making the change, causes a temporary, I don't say long term, but at least a temporary change in the way our mind is processing things. So they're just some thoughts that sort of came to my mind as I've studied and read things about this.
How do you know it's okay to stop lamenting, grieving something? How do you know it's okay? How do you know it's okay to stop this retreat?
That's a good question. I think that it sort of almost depends case by case. It's really hard to make a blanket statement on that. If you've ever talked with someone who's lost a child, say that pain is for a lifetime, and I think there's a side in which we usually just get over it, and stuff, but there is like a wound there that I think always remains. There are layers and layers of healing that I think can take place, whereas other things we may really feel like that's a chapter that we can close in our life and move on. And so I think it really comes down to is as we see where we are emotionally with that tells us there's still some work to be done, and I still need to bring this before God for still some time ahead. And I don't know if I could make a generalized statement on that other than, we just need to be honest with ourselves enough to not, as kind of alluding to yesterday, sort of shortcut that cycle and like give God a hand and saying, okay, I'm good, I'm all right. Because there's mysteries of the human heart there that we don't know. Not to say that that's fatalistic, to say we can't do anything about it. It's just more about the honest acknowledgement that the work is still remaining to be done in that grieving process. And, as a pastor myself, walking with church members who have grieved losses of children and things like that, I realize that each person is at a different place in terms of the sense of a completion or a closure. I think we're always afraid to use the word closure, but what that means to be able to feel like you've genuinely moved on from that chapter. So I think it's about honesty with where you really feel you are in that healing process. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think it's good to be clear on like timing. First of all, if you're not grieving and lamenting when you have a loss, then you need to. And then you need to take time. There will be a period of time, and depending on the loss, it could go longer, such as Pastor Steve said about the loss of a child. That would be a long time versus like maybe the loss of like a shoe or something, right? Sorry, but and then to know, I just want to say this. It is okay to stop lamenting. Because sometimes when you lose a family member, a parent, you feel like, oh, how could I ever stop? That would be disrespectful to them. That would not be honoring. That would not be loving. That would not be the right thing to do. But God wants to say, it's okay to stop. Now, the fourth area is, and I'm just going to share what the Lord gave me for a brother this weekend. I was praying for him. You'll never stop grieving. It's, sort of saw a picture of that the cup will always be empty, but the other side is there's a cup that's filling up too. And just as much as maybe you'll never fully stop being sad when you remember the loss of your parent, but there will also be joy in knowing remembrance of the parents, but also new things that are coming into your life. So just when I was thinking of that for me, when Easter comes around or what have you, I actually grieve a little bit. My heart is saddened what happened to Jesus, and I lament a bit. But then I'm also rejoicing at the same time for what he has done. And so those are like the four areas, the four stages that kind of come together through the full thing. And there is a point where I just want to say again, you can have the right to stop grieving, but you probably still be sad when you remember.
I really, like the story that Dr. Steve said about Eric, this author's son. I think as I mourn for my mom too, there will always be a place, and no one will ever replace her. But I think there's also hope knowing that, she knows the Lord, hope of knowing there are things that we may live with mystery on this side of the earth, but I can entrust those mysteries to the Lord and know that he's working it out, and he continues to journey with us.
I would say if your grieving becomes you, I think you need to kind of stop, because sometimes it's like, itching a scab that just keeps on making you bleed more. And again, for me, I would monitor it in a couple ways. One is, relationship with God. There's a point where the grieving draws you close to Christ, and then there's a point where it's just you. And I don't know that point. I think, it's just how are you doing with Jesus. And then I think the other thing, again, with the community, if you have trusted friends and mentors, and that they could speak into your life, maybe. And it's hard actually, especially if there's a tragic grieving process. But maybe you being open enough to say, how do you think about how I'm processing this situation? And I'm sure if they're a wise mentor or friend, they're not going to say much. But once into like 5th, 6th year, and you're grieving, you have become the grief, and you're not just grieving. Hopefully, you could, they'll say like, I think you're making this to be the center and not Christ to be the center. So those are just some thoughts. This question: what if you're not broken, just broke, financially broke? No. So that's interesting. But what if you're not, broken, you're just broke? What would you say that? What would you say to the psychology of the person who wrote this?
Maybe you're broke because you're broken. Is it? Just kidding. I'm assuming that's talking about finances, right?
No.
No?
No, like you don't feel like you're just broken to be healed. You're just like it's just broken. It's like it's not a sprained leg. Your leg has been amputated. I think that's what
Okay. It is a joke, I think.
It's a joke.
So
Who wrote that joke?
read a Dave Ramsey book, okay? That's what you do. All right, I don't know. It's yeah.
Okay, it's a joke. Okay. I was like reading it very spiritually. I want to tell you, if it wasn't a joke, there is hope. You have a resurrected body. Right.
Can I say one more thing about that issue, the timing of the grieving? Like, I think a great book to address that is the book of Habakkuk. You know, I think that prophet goes on a journey where he literally is witness to the judgment of God on his people that he's been praying for and ministering to. And, you know, at the very end of this long journey, he says, you know, even though the fig tree does not blossom, you know, he looks and says, in my lifetime, I'm not going to see hope here, and there's a great brokenness and a loss. And yet he still talks about rejoicing in the Lord. And I think, you know, this idea that he gives me the feet of a deer, you know, he brings me to high places. And I think it's that paradoxical joy in the midst of the sadness that is part of the human condition this side of heaven. And the truth is, that's much of what we experience as life is even as we have the hope of the Lord. And even though there is rejoicing, often it is tinged by a certain sadness and a loss that is part of the human condition that I think is part of what God is asking us to embrace, that will not really experience his fullness and fulfillment until we get to heaven, you know, when every tear will be dried and every hope fulfilled, you know. And so I think that's part of the human condition, even as Christians, is to know rejoicing in the midst of sorrow and in the midst of pain and all of that. That's a part of the Christian life, I think. So, yeah. So,
And
anyway.
I'm not sure if that question is like maybe like it's asking, is this like this is permanent?
No, so they're saying it's a joke. You know, like, you know, not broken, but you don't have any.
The author is laying claim to
But that's what
The author is? Are you guys the author?
no? Then we're assuming it's a joke?
We're assuming
There's-
if it's not a joke, who wrote it? Please talk to Pastor Kurt. But here's a question: how do you reconcile knowing truth, knowing you have faith in Christ, but still feeling deep negative emotions? So you know the truth, you really believe in Jesus, but you have deep negative emotions. How do you reconcile that? Process that. I'll start. Welcome to my world. Knowing truth, knowing you have faith in Christ.
I think that's why it is so, how do I say this? It's so special this weekend that we can actually have a space and a time to process, you know, what brokenness looks like and what lament looks like. And I think, how do I say this? Being a victorious Christian or a person who loves Jesus, it doesn't guarantee that we will feel no pain or have no pain or brokenness. And anyway, so I think, how do I say this? Even as we walk, and having faith doesn't mean you will always feel happy all the time. I mean, I think earlier this morning in my small group, I used, you know, I love Pastor Kurt, but I don't always feel love for him. You know, there are mornings, especially when we're in fights or disagreements, you know, there are mornings I want to kill him. And, but I mean, that's to prove a point that it doesn't mean I'm not committed to him. It doesn't mean I don't love him. I mean, you know, there are times in our relationship that it's okay not to be okay. And I think that for me at least, with my relationship with God, it's the same thing. I feel like it's actually very freeing for me to come before the Lord with that raw honesty to say, God, I'm really hurting, or God, I'm really struggling with this. As ugly as it is, I can actually, there's something very, how do I say this, fully known and yet unafraid. Fully known and yet able to face reality for what it is. And I think in my own lifetime, maybe for years, I wasn't able to face up the fact that I was sexually molested. I would try to be strong. I would try to say that didn't happen. I mean, literally, I was in denial of what happened. And until the Lord came and began to heal me and began to help me, it was a very freeing moment to be able to come and by the grace of God, face the reality to say, yeah, Lord, that was what it was. It was sexual molestation. And Lord, it was what it was that, my mom wasn't there, or she was there, but she didn't protect me. What happened? Why? And for years, I lived in this denial. It buried so deep that I didn't allow myself to feel, because what drove me was I was going to survive at whatever it cost. It was more important for me to be strong and survive. But at the end of the spectrum, something died in me. I mean, or that, at that point, did I actually trust God, that God would allow this to happen to me? But it didn't change my reality. It did happen. But God was still with me, and He is in the process not only healing me, but now bringing redemption. And so to be able to go back to that point and then really face it and call it for what it is, and yet still hope, or even still just having the courage to live in that brokenness, to me, it actually freed me in the Lord. And it didn't take my faith away from God, but to recognize that even in this, He's still sovereign. And even in this, I wasn't defined by what happened to me, but that God can also use what happened to me, which was bad and which made Him angry, but bring a redemptive purpose out of this.
Yeah, with that question, I just sort of given a thought of my daughter, Naomi. She just turned 15, and I got to throw her a birthday party. And a lot of times I'm busy with ministry and stuff, but now I'm not quite as busy, so I get to throw her a birthday party. And my wife advised me not to get the little cute little girl napkins, balloons, and stuff like that, but get a solid color. So I got a solid color of napkins, plates, and stuff like that, planned games, made a cake, got all the stuff ready. Because I love her. Because I love her deeply. Very, very deeply. So deeply. It's what Pastor Steve said at the very end. I celebrate over her. I rejoice over her. I delight in her. That is the Father's view of you. Now here's another picture that your view of yourself is not that. You do not celebrate over yourself. You are ashamed of yourself. You hide yourself. I don't know what's happened in your past, and I can understand maybe why that makes you feel that way. But there has to be a change sometime, a choice to say, this is the way my Father sees me. And to rest there. And I know we don't like it when we say this, but choosing not to go back to the places before. God really, really loves you. And when He looks at that little girl or that little boy or you right now, He's like, let's have a party.
think that's one thing that I think we in modern culture, it's like we want our negative emotion instantly healed. We want, our false places to be, we got that vision, we saw that negative script, and so we prayed over it, we were honest, and why is it still there? And some of it is, you have allowed that root to be there for like 20 years, some of you. And if you see a tree, that people say, from what Pastor Kurt might actually know better than me, that the root on the bottom of the tree is as big as the branches of the tree, or twice as big. And for my illustration, 10 times as big. And so sometimes it takes time, and I've had so many negative, emotions in my life, and sometimes like especially with my mom going through it, I wake up and I don't even know how I feel. I just feel like just a lot of stuff. I'm a schizophrenic. Like one moment I'm like thankful, and then another moment I feel lonely. And it's just I go all over the place. But I realize even after she passes away, it's going to take time for me to, and time in His presence. So I think that's one thing with negative emotion. You're not going to solve it right away. You need to be okay with it, and you need to keep sanding it with grace, God's grace, and don't let it become the Lord of your life. And it's okay for you to have it. But is it the Lord of your life? Is that who you're going to become, or are you going to become what we've been talking about here?
And Pastor Young talked before about self-talk, or we could say stating truths. Like a lot of times fear will start to come over me, so I'll say, Jeremiah, I forget what it is, 17 something, where it says, blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in Him. And then that sort of counters that. So you can do certain things, not only that, but to counter it.
And for me, the other thought I have is like sometimes it comes in a repeat. Like right now, I'm kind of dealing with my dad, and I've dealt with my dad and my issues with my dad into my teenage years. I've forgiven him. We had a great relationship. I really felt like I went from a teenage kid who disrespected my dad, thought of him like a loser, a lot of this other negative thoughts to somebody. Well, I felt like my dad deserved honor, had great insight. He still has some, peculiar things. And, this phase of my life with my mom being sick, like, I find myself, like, struggling with this feeling that I felt like when I was a teenager. Like being annoyed by my dad because I feel like, he's acting like a little kid while I'm trying to take care of mom. And some of it is, he's just old, and some of his other tendencies are coming back. And it's weird. I'm processing it over. I'm going like, wow, I thought I dealt with this, and now it's popping back up, and it's helping me realize, there's a few more roots there that I need to come before the Lord and figure out about what's really in my heart. So sometimes it's not that you didn't have a victory. It's like you actually had a victory and you slice off a great layer, but that we had a little bit of root there, and it's not the season. And then 5 years later, something happens, something maybe and you realize, wow, there was a little bit of splinter that I still have to pick out. And it takes phases of life, your maturity. One of the things that me and Dr. Steve, as well as Pastor Kurt, we talk about, especially when we talk about wounds, griefs, and parent, like Jane Fonda, as she was talking about, is that a lot of times when you share this to college and especially high school students, they all automatically go into blame. Kind of like, man, I'm messed up because my parents messed me up. And some part of that is true, amen? We'll say it. And hold on a second. Just want to make sure my son's not here. I can tell my younger son, he's processing it, and I can tell that he's going to take a little more time and not blame his parent, and instead to understand. And so, yeah, I don't know why I'm going into that. So all this stuff we're sharing, take it, are not going to process it correctly, keep the notes, pray about it. And I'm going to tell you right now, some of the things that Dr. Stephen we've been talking about, even when you get older, this stuff, it could really help you even deeper. Right? It's not like after this retreat you're going to figure everything out and you're going to be whole. You go through different phases and you have to apply the truth at the different phases of your life, and you realize it's the same truth and it goes deeper. Okay. Okay. One more, maybe another question is it right? Is it right to bring up someone else's brokenness to them? If so, how? Interesting question. Is it right to bring up Lynette's brokenness to her? If so, how? Somebody help me.
Yes, I think so, but it has to be done. I think a couple thoughts here is there really a relationship of trust that I've established first? And that's one aspect. I always tend to think of my relationships in terms of like a bridge I've built with this person, and thinking like, anytime you're going to do something like that, like explore someone's brokenness, you're testing that bridge, right? You're putting a heavy weight on it. And I always sort of visualize, does this bridge, can it bear the weight of that right now relationally? And then another aspect of it is checking my motives, that am I really coming from a place of love? Or is it just because it kind of ticks me off, or like I despise that part of you or something? And so I'm really doing it more out of a selfishness that I want to get this off my chest. And I want to and so those are some of the, I guess, heart checks. But I think that's part of being in community, is to lovingly be able to address some of those areas with one another. If all of us are walking on eggshells and we never speak truth in love, like that's what the Bible says, right? We need to speak truth in love to one another so that the whole body can grow to the full maturity that we're called to be. That's Ephesians 4, right? And so out of that comes the need to speak truth into one another. But again, I think it's the motivation by which we're doing it. Do we really love this person and care about them? That's why we're doing it. I mean, just one example is recently, I had to say some things to my wife about some undeniable things that are going on in her side of the family. And just sometimes with the way I see her treat her parents or things like that, or her siblings and stuff like that. And the second I go there, I know it's a fight, Like she's like, can you just leave my family alone? You deal with your family, I'll deal with my family. Sometimes it's that kind of sentiment, because her family, there's a lot of things that are very painful for her to think through. And so I thought, like, okay, it's going to be a rough night, but I have to say some of these things. And so try to couch it in as loving a way I could and care. But it was a tough conversation that I had to have with her. But sometimes I worry that sometimes, even like with husband and wife, we could get this sort of conspiracy of silence. Like, I won't go there with you, you don't go there with me, And then we just agree to not touch any of those painful places. And I don't know if that's the loving thing to do, really. I think sometimes that's the cowardly thing to do with one another, is I'd rather have your approval than actually really care about you. The wounds of a friend can be trusted, right? That's what Proverbs says.
Yeah, well, brokenness is covered. And as Pastor Steve was saying, so I always, for me or for others, it's that guy in the armor. I was Malon's knight in shining armor. And then as we get married, I have to start taking off the armor. Uh-oh, not going there. Okay. But because I'm hiding things and stuff, and so it's a little dangerous when you're touching on the area of brokenness. So then, it could be defensiveness, could be achieving, it could be a person's hiding, a person's not ready. And so this whole trust area is very important, that they would trust you and begin to now take off those armor. But in the end, a lot of times with this, if a person does not, if they're not ready then all you can do is sort of mention it. And then when I was young, I was very impatient. Like, let's get this fixed, get it fixed now, get you healed, get you back up, get ready to go. Now I'm just like, okay, might be another year, 5 years from now. And we have people come back after so many years, and now they're ready. And you just got to be really patient.
I really appreciate Dr. Steve talk about, the self-awareness, the relational awareness, and all that four quadrant of that emotional intelligence. I think, how do I say this? There are times, it's not what we say, I guess, is if you see something, go to the Lord in prayer and really seek the Lord. And then I feel like that what do you call it, that picture really helped me to kind of discern where that person is at. Maybe they're not ready for that self-awareness because sometimes the pain is so deep. And so it takes the grace of God to kind of work it out. Other times there's a relational dynamic. I think in our earlier years of ministry, my side is a broken one, so sometimes I look at Pastor Kurt's side and feel like they're the perfect Brady Bunch, kind of like everything is happy and they're all, and then so for me, I'm like, you don't know, you have no idea the depth of my pain, so don't, in a sense, almost kind of like you don't have the, how do I say this? I shouldn't say this, but anyway, the authority, the brokenness, to understand where I'm coming from, and I already know that I'm messed up. But again, it takes a lot of grace. It takes a lot of love to unmask the shame and the guilt. And for years, I was just under layers of this. The shame just imprisoned me. And if the Lord were to really unveil it and totally expose me, I think I would become undone. I really would. I think I would just go nutso. Because I can't even... I don't think I even have the courage to see, this is how broken I really am. And so I feel like part of the power of the gospel is God always meets us where we're at. He starts with where we're at, and it's this continual invitation. Would you trust me? Would you trust me? And every little step, it goes deeper, and the healing goes a little bit deeper. And sometimes we need that cushion of that relationship, even with the Lord and also with the community, our faith family. And I think for me, because I didn't grow up in a Christian home, so it really was the faith family, church mentors, surrogate parents, spiritual parents that have come alongside of me to really help me. And without their support, I don't think I could go there in my own strength. But thankfully, God comes and He meets where I'm at, and there's that continual invitation, and then we can go a deeper healing.
Yeah, just two things that come to my mind. I already lost one. Come back. Yeah, a lot of times we ask the question from suffering, the question why, and we get stuck. But if I could just help you almost jump the gap to let you know that one of the characteristics of God is redeeming. And we may not know the why, but He wants to redeem whatever that was to now use it in a way that can help others. So the very suffering that you go through, He will take and help others. Save others, set others free, heal, give life. That's redemption, a newness coming. The second thing is, and this is, I think, really a heart. I guess, like people would ask me, what are my ambitions to be a good father and a good husband? I'm just I don't have a lot of great ambitions. But I think those are two of the greatest ambitions you could ever have. Because when we begin to now take Melon's past, my past, redeem it, and come together in a wholeness, and our children have a wholeness, there's somehow from the outside world, when they view that, they feel a safety, a love, a caring. And the very brokenness from your families to you, what God is wanting to do is redeem that. The generations to come. Now when you get married, you're looking at it through new lenses because he's healed those lenses. They were cracked. Now he's healing. He's giving you new ones. And now the way you view your husband and wife is new. And the way you interact with your children are new. And your grandchildren. And that is amazing. Just roots and tree growing for this whole redeeming process. And I know many of you are single and like I don't even have a girlfriend or what have you, but yeah, it's amazing that God will do that. Some of you are married now, some of you are engaged. You know, allow to grieve, be healed, new glasses redeemed.
Couple thoughts on that. I think that when a church hurts somebody, and if that hurt is legitimate and it's real, that's a really important issue that I think we all want to think about church as a safe place, but I think in the brokenness of our world, we know and have to acknowledge that the brokenness enters the church, and it's a part of it, and so we're not immune. You know, even as I think about this whole Me Too, #MeToo movement that's going on and stuff, we see Me Too going into the church, right? The Catholic Church has just recently had a huge summit to address the biggest problems that are going on there in its church. And so I think one is structurally, part of having integrity as church leaders is to create a genuine safe place where if there is that kind of hurt or something like that going on where someone actually feels hurt by the church itself, that there is a pathway to having that voice heard by those who feel marginalized or hurt or even abused in the worst cases. And know that it's not like I'm just reporting to like an old boys club, you know? And basically, you know, it's sort of like the whistleblower syndrome, right? You blow the whistle and you're the one that's going to be kicked to the turf, you know, or something like that. That has to be a genuine sense of protection for that person. And so I think at one level I want to address it structurally. I think that a church needs to have integrity to give its members the sense of safety in being able to come forward, even if there's an accusation against the top leadership or something like that, and to really know that that voice will be heard, you know? I have said that to my own congregation on a multitude of occasions is, if you even have a beef with me, that you feel that it is me that you really want to report, to give that open invitation to go to any of my elders and report that and know that the investigation will not start by them reporting to me and saying, what I've told my own elders is, if there is ever an accusation levied against me by one of the church members, I don't want you to get on the phone and call me first. I am giving you permission to do at least some level of investigative work prior to see if there's merit to that accusation that's weighed against me, you know? And so I think at a structural level, we need to have integrity about how we protect members in the church. And within that, you know, so maybe we're not talking about the ultimate forms of abuse, but maybe just different ways. You know, I just feel like I was totally marginalized or neglected, and maybe by the leadership or non-leadership. But my hope would be that, again, there is a church culture in which there is an opportunity to air grievances, and maybe the truth is there's a distortion in even how you view things, and things need to be clarified, but what needs to happen is some type of a healthy process in which we can talk it through and work it out. So maybe for you, if you feel like it's maybe a previous church you're coming from, or maybe it's about your current church that you're in right now or something like that, that maybe a place to start would be to go to your small group leader or someone like that if it feels way too high stakes to call up a pastor or something like that. Just to maybe start with the most immediate sense of connection you have to some way of airing that grievance or dealing with it. And then at another level also, I think if I don't go to that ultimate nuclear option and just say whatever the grievances that could be within a church community, is that, what we were kind of alluding to earlier too, sometimes I think we have a very rigid and high standard for the church to say, it's this sort of like, you should know better, and you're the people of God and things like that. And I think this has to be a grace-filled community as well. And that's, I think, the other side is, do we really extend grace to one another, and what does that healing look like? But often to get to that place of real healing, reconciliation, reestablishment of those broken bonds, it does take transparency, it takes honesty, it takes a sense of equity in which, every party was rightfully heard and things were dealt with. And so I just keep coming back maybe to that idea that the hope is that there's a church culture in which there's a sense that no one's just being sort of railroaded, or like sort of just kind of steamrolled over the side and saying, well, like we're siding with the leader, because he's the one that's indispensable and you're dispensable or something like that, that everyone feels that they have a voice in the church when there's a real genuine pain that they feel that they need to express. I know I'm coming at it kind of one-dimensionally, but and I don't know if others have some thoughts on it too, to flesh that out a bit more. But.
Yeah, those are excellent points. Neutral people are good to talk to outside the church, like someone that isn't necessarily fully for you or against you, but they're just help you to think through it logically, objectively. Get one or two or three of those people, get the information, and then, as Pastor Steve said, then try to begin to share, deal with it, move through the reality of it, move towards forgiveness. Going forward, we want ultimately to be able to remain and interact in that community. There's many friendships one would have and one does not, but it may come to the point where one may have to move to another community. A lot of times we'll now connect Jesus fully to it, which is fully understandable, right? Church in Christ. But all of a sudden, because the church has hurt us, I know many who have left Jesus. And I understand that again, but Jesus doesn't want you to leave him. He wants to be your first love, your all in all in that. So it may come to that step, but that would be the last step. And then you have to realize if this begins to occur, year after year, the same thing, now we have to do a little bit deeper analyzation of the whole aspect.